A Fox News reporter broke a big story last summer after the Colorado movie theater shootings that left 12 people dead and 58 injured. Citing two law enforcement officials, Jana Winter reported that accused shooter James Holmes had sent his psychiatrist a notebook full of graphic and violent images. But that report now has Winter facing possible jail time. Soon after the horrific shootings at an Aurora, Colorado movie theater, FoxNews.com's Jana Winter broke a big story. Accused murderer James Holmes had apparently telegraphed his intentions.
She wrote about a notebook Holmes mailed to his psychiatrist before the July attack that was reportedly full of details about how he was going to kill people.
While that was indeed a big scoop, it also violated a gag order. Now, Colorado Judge Carlos Samur has threatened to toss Winter in jail for up to 6 months if she does not reveal who told her about that notebook.
I think that it's a choice that no journalist should have to make, having done it.
Former New York Times reporter Judith Miller spent 85 days in jail in 2005 after refusing to reveal her sources in an infamous case where a CIA operative was outed.
It was a very difficult decision, but knowing how indispensable confidential sources are to what we do, I really felt that I didn't have a choice.
Meanwhile, the whole issue could be moot because James Holmes' lawyers are trying to get the notebook tossed out as evidence. If that's the case, Jana Winter is off the hook. Well, more interestingly is the fact that Colorado is one of 32 states that actually has a shield law. But the judge can make rulings. There's always loopholes in these things, and there's no federal shield law, as we know. And basically saying if the prosecutor, the defense can prove that the evidence and the damning evidence kind of outweighs this reporter's right to her First Amendment rights, they could say, you know, you got to tell us because whoever told you that violated my gag order not to speak about this case. So she, you know, and then the flip side of this now, trying to get this notebook thrown out. You know, I don't think it's going to make a bit of difference in the case one way or another, but so the lawyers in this case are actually manipulating it both ways.
Well, the judge and the lawyers who may be egging her on ought to be ashamed of themselves. Look, we as journalists are supposed to act responsibly, and we should never be in a position of trying to, for instance, prevent someone from finding out about a murder or putting someone's life in jeopardy. I mean, there are limits to how far our protection should go. And I know no one has any sympathy for us because we're an unsympathetic bunch. But we need help to do our job properly and to uphold the First Amendment because there are always judges and prosecutors and cops who will try to use their power to knuckle us under and make us an adjunct of what they're doing. And we're not that, and we should have protection from having to do that. The way the pressure they're putting on her is despicable, I think.
The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press ranks Colorado as a state whose shield law is partial. And we're seeing that playing out in this particular case. But no shield law can be absolute because the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that that essentially would be unconstitutional. There's always going to be some loopholes. And it seems to me that the process that she would have to go through before being forced to testify seems like a decent balancing act. Police and prosecutors can't just come in and force her to do this. She gets to make her case before a judge. The prosecution has to make the case that this information is absolutely essential to the case and can't be gotten anywhere else. And if the prosecution can't make that case, she won't have to give up her source. Nevertheless, it does put us in a very difficult position because anonymous source reporting can be so important to the public service that, you know, we'd like to think we're trying to do.
I also think part of the pressure that she's come under has to do with the fact that the people who told her this information were almost certainly in law enforcement. And I think that...
Or the defense. That's the theory, too, that the defense leaked it.
Well, that's possible, but I think that there's been some indication that the people were in the police department, and I think that judges, prosecutors, they particularly resent when somebody who's supposed to be sort of their ally is going to the media. And I have to say, the gag order, you know, it's not on the press. And so I think, to go back to what John said, this is tough. And I know that I think in some ways what the judge and the prosecutor want is completely legitimate. It's completely understandable why they want to know why somebody violated their gag order and who that was, and that person should not have done that. The only problem is nobody will ever be able to be trusted as a source and be able to trust on the other side that the journalist is going to protect them if you don't protect them in the really hard cases. And this is one of those cases where she has to be protected.
Right, well, that's the whole problem here, is that because everybody can see the reasonable, what looks like a reasonable request from the judge. If the law enforcement guys or women open up their mouths, and I've said it's a gag order, it's a particularly bad case here where we need everybody to be on point, and they violated that, we need to know who that is, because those persons probably should not be employed, because they shouldn't have done that. On the other hand, you know, this is what I end up arguing with people about in the parking lots all over Boston, who say, you journalists think you're just above the law, you know, and they don't really get the whole what an anonymous source can give you and what you are doing to protect them and how valuable that is. And I'm left to sort of count off many cases where the information came from an anonymous source and the journalist was brave enough and smart enough and strong enough to protect that source, and you wouldn't have that information otherwise. So it's a perfect case to see each side quite clearly, but to try to also make the case for journalism.
You know, when it was Judith Miller from the New York Times and Matt Cooper from Time Magazine, got tremendous amount of case. Of course, it was a national case involving Scooter Libby and, you know, Valerie Plame. But Fox is saying, you know what, this isn't getting, do you buy this? Not getting that much attention because it's a Fox reporter.
Oh, boo-hoo. We're talking about it.
Well, and also
it took
was
a while, but it's taking off.
Yeah, but also the Judy Miller story was really a story about why we went to war as a country. It was a story about Saddam Hussein and what weapons he had. Valerie,
it was a story about star power.
It's a story about a guy who killed 12 people and it could have been stopped.
That's true. But I think why a whole country went to war and whether there was nefarious stuff going on in the White House, boy, that is such a big story. It's hard to get bigger than that.
This story has moved onto the front burner just within the last few days.